The digital countdown on the wall of Eastern Shore Canine Facility flashed 18 hours, execution time. In holding pen B22, a massive Belgian Malinois with battle scars across his face pressed against the concrete wall, golden eyes reflecting. Not fear, but something more disturbing, complete resignation. The military handlers called him Nightmare when they thought no one was listening. Too aggressive for continued service, too unpredictable for adoption, too dangerous to live. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Specimen 3369, combat-trained Belgian Malinois, slated for humane termination at 1800 hours due to extreme behavioral concerns. Director Garrison read from the tablet, his voice clinically detached as fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The sterile processing room smelled of antiseptic and finality. 3 documented handler attacks, multiple failed rehabilitation attempts, assessment score of 9, 8 on the Jenkins aggression scale. Behind the reinforced observation window, the dog they had once called Apex sat motionless, his muscular frame appearing almost statue-like, except for the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. The scars across his muzzle and left eye told stories of combat deployments that had left him both physically and psychologically damaged. At 6 years old, after 4 tours in Afghanistan, Apex had been deemed irreparably broken, a weapon that could no longer distinguish friend from foe. "Is the injection prepared?" Garrison asked the facility veterinarian, Dr. Walsh, who nodded without making eye contact. She'd euthanized dozens of failed military working dogs during her tenure, but something about this one made her stomach knot uncomfortably. "Sir, there's someone in reception asking about 3369, interrupted a young technician, appearing in the doorway. "Says she drove all night from Pennsylvania. We don't do public adoptions for Category 9 animals," Garrison replied without looking up from his tablet, "especially not combat washouts with bite histories." The technician hesitated. "She's different, sir. Says she's from Redemption K9 Project, has paperwork from Senator Holloway's office." Garrison's expression darkened. "Political interference. Wonderful." He checked his watch. 17:46 hours. "Fine. 10 minutes, then we proceed as scheduled." Through the facility's maze of sterile corridors, a woman with storm-grey eyes strode with purpose, her gait slightly uneven due to a prosthetic right leg partially visible beneath her cargo pants. Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Kate Winters, retired, didn't have time for the bureaucratic dance Garrison clearly wanted to perform as he reluctantly led her to his office rather than directly to the dog. "Director, I've reviewed 3369's file," Kate said without preamble, refusing his gestured offer to sit. "Your assessment is incomplete. His behavioral issues stem from specific combat trauma, not inherent aggression." Garrison's face remained impassive. "With respect, Colonel Winters, we've had this dog for 3 months. Our behavioral team includes 2 veterinary experts with PhDs in canine psychology. The dog is dangerous and unpredictable." Kate placed a folder on his desk. "These are transfer papers, already approved by the Pentagon's military working dog program. Senator Holloway fast-tracked them as a personal favor." "Of course he did," Garrison muttered. The senator's son had served in Kate's unit before she'd lost her leg to an IED. "Colonel, this isn't some PTSD case you can rehabilitate with treats and kind words. This animal was specifically selected and trained for his aggression. He has 4 confirmed handler attacks, 3, Kate corrected. The incident in Kandahar was miscategorized. He was protecting his handler from friendly fire. I've included witness statements." Garrison's eyes narrowed. "You knew this dog." "I authorized his recruitment into the program 5 years ago," Kate acknowledged, "and I'm well aware of what he's become. but I'm also aware of what he could be again. He's a liability, Garrison insisted, tapping his tablet to display incident reports. Last month, he nearly severed a technician's arm during a standard feeding. After the technician used a shock collar as a shortcut, Kate countered. Also, in my report, show me the dog, Director. Time's running out for both of us. Reluctantly, Garrison led her to the observation room. Through the reinforced glass, Apex remained in his same position, unmoving, his scarred face turned away from the humans who had come to determine his fate. Jesus, Kate whispered, her professional composure cracking momentarily. The dog's condition was worse than she'd anticipated. Once a magnificent 85-pound specimen of power and precision, Apex had lost at least 15 pounds of muscle. The glossy fur that had once shimmered like polished mahogany was now dull and patchy. But it was his posture that disturbed her most. The complete absence of the alertness and intensity that had once defined him. That's not aggression, she said after studying him. That's surrender. Unpredictable transitions from catatonia to extreme aggression, Garrison recited from memory. Classic warning sign in combat dogs with neurological damage. He's beyond saving, Colonel. Kate turned to face him directly. Let me in there. Absolutely not. Our insurance alone, I'll sign whatever waivers you need, but I'm not leaving here without seeing those eyes up close. And if he attacks you, if he confirms everything in our assessment? Kate's expression didn't waver. Then I'll be the one to put him down myself. The standoff lasted several seconds before Garrison relented. Your funeral, he muttered, inputting an authorization code that unlocked the security door. Literally, potentially. Dr. Walsh appeared with a stack of liability waivers and a sedative kit. At minimum, let me tranquilize him first, she urged as Kate signed the forms without reading them. No drugs, Kate replied. I need to see who he really is, not who he is sedated. The security door hissed as it unlocked. Kate removed her outer jacket, revealing arms corded with lean muscle and marked with their own set of scars. She also unstrapped something from her prosthetic leg, a small metal object that she slipped into her pocket. No sudden movements, Garrison advised through the intercom as she approached the threshold. Maintain eye contact once established. If he lunges, I know how to approach a military working dog, Kate cut him off. Kill the intercom. You're adding stress. As the door sealed behind her, Kate felt a familiar rush of adrenaline, the same clarity that had once accompanied night raids and reconnaissance missions. The concrete room was bare, except for a water bowl, a thin mat, and the dog who still hadn't acknowledged her presence. Hey, Apex, she said softly, using his original name rather than his impersonal designation. Remember me? For several moments, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the dog's scarred ears twitched, his massive head turned, degree by degree, until one golden eye fixed on her. There was no growl, no raised hackles, just a hollow stare from an animal who had given up expecting anything from humans except pain and eventual death. Kate didn't move closer. Instead, she slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the cold concrete, her prosthetic legs stretched out awkwardly. Yeah, I'm a little different now too, she said conversationally. Got myself blown up about 2 years after you shipped out with Martinez's unit. Through the observation window, Garrison and Walsh watched in tense silence, tranquilizer guns ready. The seconds stretched into minutes as Kate continued to talk quietly to the motionless dog. You got a raw deal, buddy, she continued. They trained you to fight, to protect, to be suspicious of anything unfamiliar. Then they expected you to turn it off like a light switch. She reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew the object. She'd taken from her prosthetic a battered metal dog tag that gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights. For the first time, Apex's posture changed. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the metal that had once hung from his tactical collar during training. "Yeah, you remember," Kate encouraged. "I kept it when they transferred you to active duty, figured it might bring you luck." She placed the tag on the concrete floor between them. "Didn't work out that way for either of us, did it?" Apex's gaze shifted between the tag and Kate's face. A low rumble began in his chest, not quite a growl, something more complex. "He's preparing to attack," Garrison warned through the observation glass. "Walsh, get the tranquilizer ready." Kate ignored them, maintaining perfect stillness as Apex's rumble grew louder. Then, in a movement almost too quick to follow, the dog lunged forward. Garrison shouted for the security team as Walsh raised the tranquilizer gun. But through the window, they witnessed something unexpected. Apex had lunged not at Kate, but at the dog tag. He now stood rigid, head lowered over the metal object, the rumble in his chest transforming into a high-pitched whine that spoke of confusion and remembrance. "There you are," Kate whispered. "I knew you were still in there." With excruciating slowness, she extended her open palm, not toward the dog, but toward the floor beside the tag. For 30 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, in a movement so tentative it barely disturbed the air, Apex took one step forward, then another. His massive head lowered, not in aggression, but in a gesture almost like submission, and pressed against Kate's outstretched fingers. Through the window, Dr. Walsh lowered her tranquilizer gun, her scientific detachment cracking as she witnessed what could only be described as recognition. Garrison remained skeptical, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. "A momentary aberration," he insisted. "One positive interaction doesn't negate months of assessment." But Kate wasn't listening to them anymore. As Apex allowed her to gently touch the scarred ridge of his muzzle, she saw something flicker in those golden eyes. A faint spark where there had been only emptiness before. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile seed of its possibility. "You're coming with me," she told the dog quietly. "We're both too stubborn to die just yet." Outside the facility, storm clouds gathered over the Virginia coastline, mirroring the battle of wills taking place within. The digital clock on the wall now read 18:17, 17 minutes past the scheduled euthanasia. Apex's execution had been postponed, but whether it was a temporary reprieve or a genuine second chance remained precariously uncertain. Director Garrison was unmoved by the scene he'd witnessed. "One interaction in a controlled environment proves nothing," he insisted, as Kate completed the transfer paperwork. "That animal has caused serious injuries to trained handlers. The liability alone is mine now," Kate interrupted, signing the final form with a decisive stroke, "as is the responsibility. At minimum, he requires sedation for transport," Dr. Walsh advised, more sympathetically. "For both your safety and his." Kate shook her head. "No drugs. He's had enough chemicals pumped into him to manipulate his behavior." She turned to face Garrison directly. "Your facility failed him because you treated him like a malfunctioning weapon instead of a wounded warrior. He doesn't need to be decommissioned. He needs to be healed." "Your idealism is going to get someone hurt," Garrison predicted darkly. "Possibly," Kate acknowledged. "But it won't be the first time I've taken a calculated risk for something I believe in." As facility staff prepared the specialized transport kennel, Kate returned to Apex's holding room alone. The dog had retreated to his corner, but watched her with newly alert eyes as she approached. "Here's the deal," she told him, kneeling at a respectful distance. "Where we're going isn't easy. It's not a retirement home with tennis balls and belly rubs. It's a working farm with strict rules and expectations. You'll have to relearn everything, how to be around humans, other dogs, even yourself." She held his gaze steadily. "But no one will ever throw you away again. That's my promise." Apex's scarred face revealed nothing, but as Kate carefully attached a new tactical lead to his worn collar, he rose without resistance and followed her to the door. Not with eagerness, but with a kind of wary acceptance that seemed, to those watching, through the observation window, almost like the first tentative step towards something resembling hope. The loading bay doors opened to reveal a specialized SUV with reinforced K9 compartments. Rain had begun to fall, heavy drops that seemed to cleanse the sterile scent of the facility from Apex's fur as Kate guided him across the wet concrete. "That dog will never be safe," Garrison called as a parting shot. "Some damage can't be undone." Kate paused, turning back toward him with Apex motionless at her side. The rain plastered her dark hair against her face, highlighting the scar that ran from her temple to her jaw, another souvenir from the explosion that had taken her leg. "Maybe not," she acknowledged, rain dripping from her chin. "But damaged doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the most broken things become the most important." She glanced down at the silent dog beside her. "We'll see you again, Director. Both of us. And I think you'll be surprised by what this monster becomes." As the SUV pulled away from the Eastern Shore Canine facility, lightning split the darkening sky. In the reinforced compartment, separated from Kate by a safety barrier, Apex stood rigidly, his golden eyes fixed on the facility as it receded in the rain-streaked window. For 5 years, he had been the perfect weapon, fearless, lethal, and unquestioning. Then, when combat had broken something fundamental inside him, he had become a liability to be discarded. What he might become next remained unwritten. Have you ever been underestimated or discarded? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell me which city you're watching from. The road stretched before them, winding through the Virginia countryside toward Pennsylvania and the remote farm that housed the Redemption K9 project. Founded 3 years earlier by Kate and 2 other disabled veterans, the program had begun with a simple premise. Sometimes those considered beyond saving were precisely the ones most worth fighting for. Kate checked the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the scarred face watching the world pass by with guarded vigilance. "Day 1. Apex," she murmured. Day 1. Neither could know that this rain-soaked journey was merely the opening chapter of a transformation that would eventually challenge everything both humans and canines believed about healing, purpose, and the extraordinary capacities hidden within those society too quickly labels as monsters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The journey from Virginia to the Pennsylvania Highlands took nearly 4 hours. The rain, a constant companion as Kate's SUV navigated increasingly remote country roads. Periodically, she glanced at the rearview mirror to check on Apex, who maintained his vigilant stance despite the vehicle's motion. Not once during the entire drive did he lie down or relax his guard. Hypervigilance, Kate murmured to herself. Just like the rest of us. The Redemption K9 project occupied 80 acres of former farmland nestled against the Appalachian foothills, its isolation both intentional and necessary. As Kate's vehicle crested the final hill, the compound came into view. Not the cheerful sanctuary many might imagine, but a practical, functional facility built with security and rehabilitation in mind. A reinforced perimeter fence surrounded the main grounds. Within its boundaries stood a renovated farmhouse serving as administrative headquarters, a modern kennel facility with adjacent training yards, and several outbuildings repurposed as veterinary clinic, equipment storage, and staff housing. Beyond these core structures, carefully segmented training areas extended into the surrounding woodland and fields. As Kate's SUV approached the main gate, a tall figure emerged from the guardhouse despite the continuing rain. Miles Dawson, former Army Ranger and the project's security chief, squinted through the downpour at the vehicle's occupant before manually opening the gate, his prosthetic right arm gleaming wet in the headlights. "You're late," he called as Kate rolled down her window. "Started thinking Garrison found a way to shut you down." "He tried," Kate replied, "but Senator Holloway's paperwork held." Miles peered past her toward the K9 compartment. "That him? The Afghanistan nightmare dog?" "That's him. I'll need the isolation kennel prepped." Miles's expression remained professional, but concern flickered in his eyes. "Dr. Nazari is waiting at the medical intake. She's not happy about the no sedation decision." He hesitated. "Kate, I read the full assessment from Eastern Shore. This isn't like our usual cases." "He's exactly like our usual cases," Kate countered, "just more so." She began rolling up her window, then paused. "And Miles, his name is Apex, not the nightmare dog. Labels are part of what put him on death row." The SUV continued up the gravel driveway toward a low building partially built into the hillside, the project's intake facility, designed specifically for their most challenging cases. As Kate parked, the building's doors opened to reveal Dr. Farah Nazari, the project's lead veterinarian, along with two male handlers in tactical gear. "The transport team is unnecessary," Kate called as she exited the vehicle, rain immediately soaking her hair. "And excessive." "The transport team is protocol," Dr. Nazari replied firmly, her Iranian accent more pronounced when she was annoyed. "Especially for a dog with multiple handler attacks on record." She approached Kate while the handlers maintained their distance. "You should have allowed sedation for transport. It was reckless to drive 4 hours with an unstable combat dog." "He's not unstable, he's traumatized," Kate replied. "There's a difference." Dr. Nazari's expression softened slightly. "I know the difference better than most, Catherine, but trauma can make humans and animals unpredictable. That's why we have protocols." She glanced toward the SUV's specialized compartment. "How was he during transport?" "Hypervigilant, alert, no aggressive displays." Kate moved toward the rear of the vehicle. "He's ready for intake." The specialized door system allowed Kate to open the outer compartment, while a secondary barrier remained between Apex and the outside world. The handlers tensed visibly as the scarred face appeared in the opening, golden, eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with military precision. "Secure perimeter," one handler murmured appreciatively, noting how the dog immediately assessed potential threats and escape routes. "Apex," Kate called softly, drawing the dog's attention to her face. "Time to move." To the handler's visible surprise, the Belgian Malinois responded to the simple command, stepping carefully from the vehicle to the wet gravel. The specialized lead remained slack between them, not dragging Apex forward, but merely connecting them as the dog chose to follow Kate toward the intake building's open doors. "Remarkable," Dr. Nazari observed quietly. "He's operationally responsive to you after just hours of contact." "He remembers me from his initial training," Kate replied, "before they deployed him to Afghanistan." The intake room was clinically designed with the same priorities as the rest of the facility. Safety first, comfort second. Seamless epoxy floors allowed for complete sanitization. Recessed lighting reduced shadows that might trigger defensive responses. A reinforced examination area provided necessary restraint options without appearing threatening. "Standard medical intake first," Dr. Nazari instructed, donning a specialized bite-resistant sleeve as a precaution. "Then full body scan for embedded shrapnel or other combat injuries. Blood work, weight assessment, dental check. Kate nodded, guiding Apex to the examination platform. I'll stay throughout. No restraints unless absolutely necessary. Dr. Nazari's expression remained skeptical, but she proceeded with the initial examination, careful movements, constant verbal cues before any touch, and a methodical approach that respected the dog's space and dignity. To everyone's surprise, Apex remained rigidly compliant, his body tense but his behavior controlled as the veterinarian assessed his condition. Severe muscle atrophy, she noted, fingers gently probing his once powerful shoulders. Approximately 12 to 15% body mass loss, multiple scar tissue formations consistent with shrapnel and possibly knife wounds. Her fingers traced a particularly prominent scar that ran along his left flank. This wasn't in his military medical records. Looks like a makeshift field suture, Kate observed. Probably happened during his last deployment. The handler may have treated it without reporting it. Dr. Nazari continued her examination, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Evidence of prolonged muzzle restraint, dental damage consistent with attempting to chew through metal. She carefully examined his paws. Torn pads, healed incorrectly. He was kept on concrete without proper care for extended periods. Kate's jaw tightened. Eastern Shore's solution for dogs they can't handle is to confine them until they break completely. The full examination took nearly 2 hours, revealing a catalogue of physical neglect and inadequate rehabilitation attempts. Throughout the process, Apex remained stone still, his compliance not born of trust, but of something more complex, a soldier's discipline overlaid with learned helplessness. Physically, I can treat most of these issues, Dr. Nazari concluded, reviewing her extensive notes. Nutritional supplements, muscle rehabilitation, proper dental care. But Catherine... She lowered her voice, though Apex watched her as if understanding every word. The psychological damage is profound. This isn't just PTSD. This dog has been systematically broken. Then we'll systematically rebuild him, Kate replied without hesitation. One day at a time. As Dr. Nazari completed her notes, Miles appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Perimeter check is complete. Isolation kennel is prepped, but we have a situation developing at the main house. Kate raised an eyebrow. What kind of situation? Director Hargrove is here, with 2 board members and someone from the Defense Department's military working dog program. Kate cursed under her breath. They weren't supposed to visit until next week. Apparently, Director Garrison made some calls after you left Virginia. Raised concerns about project resources being allocated to a dangerous liability without a proper board approval. Politics. Kate muttered. Always politics. They're waiting for a full briefing. Hargrove looks pissed. Kate glanced at Apex, who remained motionless on the examination platform, watching this exchange with unnerving intensity. Complete the intake, she instructed Dr. Nazari. Get him settled in isolation as planned. I'll deal with Hargrove. The main farmhouse, with its deceptively rustic exterior and thoroughly modernized interior, served as Redemption K9's administrative heart. As Kate entered, still damp from the rain and exhausted from the day's tension, 4 people looked up from the conference table, none with particularly welcoming expressions. Director Patricia Hargrove, a former military intelligence officer with steel-grey hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat at the head of the table. Flanking her were Jacob Reinhardt and Dr. Elena Vasquez, both board members with significant influence over the project's funding. The 4th individual, a trim man in an impeccable suit, was unfamiliar to Kate. Colonel Winters, Hargrove acknowledged with carefully neutral formality. I believe you've met Mr. Reinhardt and Dr. Vasquez. She gestured to the stranger. This is Mr. Lawrence Chen from the Pentagon's Military Working Dog Program. Kate nodded professionally, though her guard immediately rose at Chen's presence. The MWD program overseer's unexpected appearance suggested this was more than a routine visit. "I understand congratulations are in order," Hargrove continued, her tone making it clear these were not actually forthcoming. "You've successfully extracted a Level 9 aggressive combat canine from Eastern Shore against their medical recommendation and without board consultation." "Apex was scheduled for euthanasia," Kate replied evenly. "The extraction couldn't wait for committee deliberation." "Specimen 3369, Chen corrected smoothly, was designated for humane termination following extensive behavioral assessment by qualified experts." Kate's eyes narrowed slightly. "His name is Apex, and with respect, Mr. Chen, Eastern Shore's qualified experts are primarily concerned with liability mitigation, not rehabilitation." "A concern we share," Reinhardt interjected. "He was a venture capitalist whose foundation provided nearly 30% of the project's annual budget." Director Garrison sent over the dog's complete file. 3 handler attacks, Colonel Winters, 2 requiring hospitalization. "Context matters," Kate countered. "Each incident occurred under specific circumstances that still resulted in human injuries," Dr. Vasquez interrupted. A renowned veterinary behaviorist, she had been initially skeptical of the project's mission, but had become a cautious supporter after witnessing several successful rehabilitations. "Kate, I've reviewed the assessment. His Jenkins aggression scale score is nearly off the charts." "The Jenkins scale was designed for domestically raised dogs, not military working dogs trained specifically for aggression," Kate pointed out. "It's like using civilian PTSD metrics to evaluate special forces operators." "The fact remains," Director Hargrove said firmly, "that you committed project resources to an extremely high-risk case without proper authorization. The potential liability alone is covered," Kate interrupted, withdrawing a folder from her bag. "Senator Holloway's office has arranged specialized insurance coverage for Apex's rehabilitation. Additionally, I've signed personal liability waivers that indemnify the project." This revelation created a momentary pause as the documents were passed around the table. "These appear to be in order," Hargrove acknowledged reluctantly. "But insurance doesn't prevent injuries, Colonel. It merely pays for them afterward." Chen leaned forward, his expression professionally concerned. "Colonel Winters, no one questions your dedication or expertise. Your work with combat-traumatized dogs has been remarkable. But this particular animal represents an exceptional risk. Its aggression metrics suggest neurological damage, not just psychological trauma." "He," Kate corrected firmly, "not it. And neurological assumptions, without proper testing, are premature." "You misunderstand my presence here," Chen continued smoothly. "I'm not merely expressing the program's concerns. I'm here to offer an alternative solution." He opened his briefcase and withdrew an official-looking document. "The department is prepared to transfer custody of Specimen 3369 to our research division. The animal's unique psychology presents valuable data opportunities for improving future working dog training protocols." The implication was clear, though carefully phrased. The research division would use Apex as a test subject, studying his breakdown to prevent similar failures in future military dogs. "Absolutely not," Kate responded, her voice dangerously quiet. "It would resolve the liability issues," Reinhardt observed pragmatically, "and provide additional funding opportunities through Defense Department grants." Kate's expression hardened. "We don't trade lives for grants, Jacob, not human or canine." "No one is suggesting anything inhumane," Chen assured with practiced diplomacy. Merely specialized containment and observation. You mean a laboratory environment, Kate translated, where he spends the remainder of his life in a cage, being studied like a mechanical failure rather than treated like a wounded veteran. Colonel Winters, Hargrove intervened, her tone, my warning. Director, may I speak with you privately? Kate requested, her composure professionally maintained despite her growing anger. After a moment's consideration, Hargrove nodded. Please excuse us, she told the others, leading Kate to her adjacent office and closing the door. Once alone, Kate spoke without preamble. You know what Chen's research division actually does, Patricia. You have the clearance level to know. Hargrove's expression remained impassive. I'm aware of their methodologies. Then you understand why I can't allow Apex to be transferred. They'll break him down to his component parts, psychologically and possibly physically, all in the name of improving the program. And you believe you can rehabilitate an animal that 4 professional handlers couldn't control? Hargrove challenged. An animal with documented neurological aggression triggers. I believe I have to try, Kate replied simply. That's what this project was founded for. Not the easy cases, but the ones everyone else has given up on. Hargrove studied Kate for a long moment, her military assessment habits evident in her scrutiny. This is personal for you. Kate didn't deny it. I recruited him into the program. I saw his potential, his intelligence. I recommended him for deployment with Martinez's unit. And now you feel responsible for what he became, Hargrove concluded. That's a dangerous motivation, Colonel. It clouds judgment. Or clarifies purpose, Kate countered. His breakdown isn't a random malfunction, Patricia. It's the result of systemic failures in how we deploy and support military working dogs. He deserves a chance at rehabilitation, not to be discarded as an inconvenient reminder of the program's flaws. Hargrove moved to her window, looking out at the rain-soaked training fields where other damaged dogs, former police K9s, failed service animals and military washouts were gradually reclaiming their purpose under the project's specialized protocols. The board won't approve dedicated resources for a case with his risk profile, she finally said. Not with Chen offering an alternative that protects our liability exposure. Then I'll use my personal resources, Kate replied without hesitation. My time, my equipment. I'll house him in the isolation sector and work with him independently of the main program. And if he proves beyond rehabilitation, if he attacks you or another staff member, Kate met Hargrove's gaze steadily. Then I'll make the hard call, but I need to try, Patricia, for both our sakes. The silence stretched between them, laden with the weight of unspoken history. Both women had served, both had commanded, and both understood the burden of responsibility for lives under their authority, human and canine. 60 days, Hargrove finally declared. You have 60 days to demonstrate measurable progress in baseline aggression indicators. Independent evaluation at 30-day intervals by Dr. Vasquez. No integration with general population until cleared by both medical and behavioral staff. She fixed Kate with a penetrating stare. And you will accept full personal liability, documented and notarized. Agreed, Kate replied immediately. If at any point Dr. Nazari or Dr. Vasquez determines the animal presents an imminent threat, I'll comply with their assessment, Kate promised. But they have to actually assess him, not just his paperwork. Hargrove nodded, decision made. I'll inform the board and Mr. Chen of the conditions. You'll need to be present to sign the formal documentation. As they prepared to return to the conference room, Hargrove paused with her hand on the doorknob. Catherine, she said, reverting to Kate's full name, something she did only when speaking as a friend rather than a director. I've supported your vision for this project from the beginning. I believe in second chances, in rehabilitation over euthanasia, but some wounds can't be healed, some damage can't be undone. Her expression softened marginally. Don't make this dog a proxy for your own recovery. Kate absorbed the warning, recognizing both its professional validity and personal insight. I won't, she assured her former commanding officer, but I won't give up on him without trying everything possible. That's the promise we make to all of them when they come here. Back in the conference room, the formal agreement was reluctantly crafted. Chen made several additional attempts to secure Apex for his department's research, but Hargrove held firm to the 60-day evaluation plan. By the time signatures were applied to the necessary documents, night had fallen completely, the rain intensifying to a steady downpour that drummed against the farmhouse's roof. I should check on Apex, Kate said as the meeting concluded. He's in an unfamiliar environment after a stressful day. I'll accompany you, Dr. Vasquez offered, her professional curiosity evident. Since I'll be conducting his 30-day evaluation, I should establish baseline observations. Together, they made their way through the rain to the isolation facility, a separate structure deliberately positioned away from the main kennels. Inside, specialized housing units provided secure containment for the project's most challenging cases, dogs whose behavioral issues required intensive individual intervention. Before they could safely interact with the general population, Miles met them at the entrance, his expression guarded. He settled in Isolation Unit 3, he reported. Took the food we offered, but hasn't touched the water. Hasn't moved from his alert position since Dr. Nazari completed the intake process. The isolation units featured reinforced walls, with observation windows and specialized entry systems designed to prevent escapes or injuries during handler interactions. Through the window of Unit 3, they could see Apex sitting rigidly in the center of the space, his posture military precise despite his obvious exhaustion and the comfortable bedding provided in one corner. Classic hypervigilance, Dr. Vasquez observed clinically. He's maintaining tactical readiness despite physical depletion, typical of severe combat PTSD in working dogs. He's waiting, Kate corrected quietly. For what? For whatever comes next. The next command, the next threat, the next disappointment. And Kate studied the dog's tense posture and alert eyes that, despite his exhaustion, refused to close. He's been in tactical deployment mode for so long, he's forgotten how to stand down. Dr. Vasquez made notes on her tablet. Deprogramming ingrained combat responses is extraordinarily difficult, Kate. Military working dogs are specifically selected for their high drive and trained to maintain operational readiness under extreme stress. When those traits become pathologically expressed, He can hear you, Kate interrupted gently, and he understands more than you think. Through the window, Apex's golden eyes had indeed fixed on them, his attention laser-focused despite the supposed soundproofing of the unit. His ears had shifted forward at the sound of Kate's voice, his head tilting almost imperceptibly. "I need some time with him," Kate told the others. "Alone." Miles frowned. Protocol requires a security observer for all interactions with Category 9 animals during the first 72 hours. "I'll observe from the monitoring station," Dr. Vasquez offered unexpectedly. "That satisfies protocol while giving Colonel Winters the direct interaction she needs to establish baseline rapport." Once the others had withdrawn to the adjacent monitoring room, Kate entered the security codes and stepped into Apex's isolation unit. The dog remained centered in the room, his posture unchanged, but his eyes tracking her every movement with unnerving intensity. "Long day, wasn't it?" Kate said conversationally, carefully lowering herself to sit cross-legged on the floor, her prosthetic leg extended awkwardly. "New places, new people, too many examinations." She made no attempt to approach him or encourage him to approach her. "Tomorrow will be quieter. Just you and me figuring out where we go from here." Apex's ears twitched at her voice, but otherwise, he remained statue still, a soldier awaiting orders or bracing for threat. Kate continued speaking softly, not expecting response but establishing presence. "I know what they did to you. How they tried to fix what they broke with shock collars and isolation. How they punished you for behaviors they programmed into you." She extended her hand, palm up, on the floor between them, not reaching toward him, but offering connection. "We're going to try something different here." For long minutes, nothing changed. Kate continued her gentle monologue while Apex maintained his vigilant posture. Through the observation window, Dr. Vasquez watched with clinical interest, making occasional notes, but primarily observing the unusual dynamic developing between traumatized handler and traumatized dog. Then, so subtly it was almost imperceptible, Apex shifted his weight. His rigid posture eased by perhaps a centimeter. One paw moved forward slightly, then the other, as he gradually decreased the distance between them by inches rather than steps. "That's it," Kate encouraged softly. "No rush. We've got all the time in the world." By incremental movements, Apex eventually positioned himself within arm's length of Kate, still alert but no longer poised for immediate defense. Then, in a gesture that caught even Kate by surprise, he lowered himself to a sphinx position, his scarred muzzle resting on his paws while maintaining eye contact. It wasn't surrender or complete relaxation, but for a dog who had spent months in perpetual fight-or-flight vigilance, it represented a monumental shift. The first tentative indication that somewhere beneath the layers of combat conditioning and trauma response, the capacity for trust might still exist. "Good boy," Kate whispered, her voice thick with emotion she rarely permitted herself to display. "Very good boy." In the monitoring room, Dr. Vasquez watched with professional amazement as the dog Eastern Shore had deemed irredeemably aggressive took his first halting step toward rehabilitation. Her clinical skepticism remained. 60 days was an incredibly short timeline for a case this severe, but she couldn't deny the significance of what she was witnessing. "Baseline established," she murmured to herself, making a final note before quietly withdrawing to leave handler and dog to continue their fragile reconnection in peace. Outside, the storm that had followed them from Virginia finally began to abate, the relentless downpour softening to a gentle rain as midnight approached. Within the isolation unit, Kate remained seated on the floor, her voice a constant reassuring presence, as Apex gradually permitted himself the vulnerability of closing his eyes, if only for moments at a time. Day 1 had ended. The real work would begin tomorrow. Dawn broke over the Pennsylvania highlands with gentle persistence, light filtering through the specialized windows of Isolation Unit 3, where Apex had spent his first night at Redemption. K9. Unlike the harsh fluorescence of Eastern Shore's holding pens, these windows were designed to provide natural light cycles, helping reset the disrupted circadian rhythms common in traumatized working dogs. Kate arrived at 5:30 a.m., her own habits still shaped by military precision despite years in civilian life. Through the observation window, she studied Apex before entering. The Belgian Malinois was no longer maintaining the rigid, alert posture of the previous evening. Instead, he had positioned himself in the furthest corner, back against the wall, tactically sound for defense, with full visibility of the door while minimizing his own exposure. "Smart positioning," Kate murmured to herself, recognizing the combat intelligence that had once made Apex exceptional. Even in his traumatized state, his tactical instincts remained intact. The morning protocol Kate had designed specifically for Apex differed significantly from Eastern Shore's approach. Where they had relied on dominance and control, Kate's methodology centered on choice and predictability, two elements typically stripped from military working dogs who developed behavioral issues. She entered the security code and spoke clearly before the door opened. "Apex, it's Kate. I'm coming in." The advance notice was intentional, eliminating surprise that might trigger defensive responses. Inside, she moved deliberately to the center of the room, then lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the floor as she had the previous night. From her pocket, she removed a small plastic container and placed it on the floor beside her. "Morning check-in," she explained conversationally, maintaining a calm, steady tone. "Every day starts the same way here. Predictable routine, your choice whether to participate." Apex watched her from his corner, golden eyes alert but less hyper-vigilant than before. The slight relaxation of his facial muscles suggested he had actually slept, if only in brief intervals. "First decision of the day is yours," Kate continued, opening the container to reveal small pieces of cooked chicken. "You can stay where you are, which is completely fine, or you can join me for breakfast. No commands, no expectations." In traditional military K-9 training, food was often used as a reward for compliance. Eastern Shore's rehabilitation approach had maintained this control-based system, effectively punishing traumatized dogs by withholding food when they failed to perform desired behaviors. Kate's approach deliberately inverted this dynamic, offering nutrition as a right rather than a reward. For several minutes, nothing changed. Apex remained in his defensive position while Kate sat quietly, occasionally taking a piece of chicken for herself to demonstrate its safety. Then, in a movement so subtle it was barely perceptible, Apex's nostrils flared as he actively scented the food. "Good protein," Kate commented. "Dr. Nazari recommended a specific nutritional plan to rebuild your muscle mass. This is just the appetizer before your regular breakfast." Another minute passed before Apex made his decision. With the same incremental movements as the previous night, he began reducing the distance between them, not approaching directly, but taking a circuitous route along the perimeter of the room. The behavior was classic protection training. He was clearing the space before approaching a potential target. Kate remained motionless, except for her steady breathing, allowing Apex to perform his security sweep. When he finally approached the food container, he maintained a careful distance from Kate herself, close enough to access the chicken, but positioned to react if she made any sudden movements. "Good choice," she said softly, as he carefully took his first piece. His teeth were yellowed from neglect, and he chewed with evident discomfort, confirming Dr. Nazari's assessment of dental issues requiring treatment. This simple morning ritual, Kate sitting quietly while Apex chose whether and how to approach, would become the foundation of their daily routine. Not a dominance interaction, but a trust-building exercise where the traumatized dog could begin reclaiming agency after months of having all choices stripped away. After Apex had eaten several pieces of chicken, Kate slowly rose to her feet. "Time for our morning assessment," she explained, maintaining the conversational tone. "We'll go outside to the secure yard, check your movement patterns, see how you interact with a new environment." The specialized lead she attached to his tactical collar was unlike the standard restraints used at Eastern Shore. Designed specifically for combat-traumatized dogs, it provided security without triggering the control responses that often escalated aggressive behaviors. Apex accepted the lead without resistance, though his body tensed in anticipation of leaving the relative security of the isolation unit. The secure yard connected directly to the isolation facility, minimizing exposure to unfamiliar stimuli. During early rehabilitation, as they stepped outside into the cool morning air, Apex's demeanor transformed instantly. His head lifted, nostrils flaring as he processed the multitude of natural scents: soil, grass, the surrounding pine forest, distant wildlife. After months in the sterile confinement of Eastern Shore, the sensory input was overwhelming. Kate allowed him to acclimate, the lead loose between them as Apex methodically surveyed his new environment. His movement pattern was revealing. He executed a perfect perimeter check, identical to his combat training protocols for securing an area before investigating the central space. Still the tactician, Kate observed quietly to Dr. Nazari, who had arrived to conduct her morning medical assessment. Extraordinary, the veterinarian agreed, watching from outside the fence. His operational patterns remain intact despite his psychological trauma. Most cases I've seen with his level of breakdown show degraded function across all behavioral systems. That's why Eastern Shore failed with him, Kate replied. They tried generic PTSD protocols designed for domestic dogs with traumatic experiences. But Apex isn't just a traumatized dog, he's a traumatized soldier. Dr. Nazari made notes on her tablet. His physical movement shows the left hind limb favoring we observed yesterday, probable shrapnel injury that healed improperly, but his gait is more fluid today, less guarded. Better pain management without the constant stress response, Kate suggested. As they spoke, Apex completed his methodical survey of the yard and returned to stand near Kate, not seeking contact, but positioning himself within the established Handler K9 tactical distance ingrained through his military training. He's defaulting to operational patterns, Dr. Nazari observed. That could be promising for rehabilitation, or it could indicate he's simply falling back on conditioning rather than forming genuine connection. It's day one, Kate reminded her. We're meeting him where he is, not where we want him to be. The morning assessment continued with basic movement exercises designed to evaluate Apex's physical condition without triggering defensive responses. Rather than using commands that might activate his combat training, Kate used subtle body, language and environmental cues to invite different behaviors. Instead of ordering come, she simply moved to a new position and waited for Apex to adjust his tactical positioning relative to her. Rather than commanding sit, she created situations where sitting was the most logical choice for maintaining surveillance. This approach allowed her to assess his capabilities while respecting the hypervigilant state that had kept him alive through combat deployments. As the assessment progressed, a subtle shift occurred in Apex's demeanor. His movements, initially stiff and calculated, began showing glimpses of natural canine behavior. When Kate rolled a ball across the yard, not as a fetch command, but simply as an environmental change, Apex tracked it with predatory focus, his body momentarily expressing the innate drive that had made him suitable for military work in the first place. He didn't chase the ball or attempt to retrieve it, but for a fleeting instant his attention had shifted from defensive scanning to genuine interest. The moment passed quickly as he reverted to security protocols, but Kate and Dr. Nazari exchanged meaningful glances. Beneath the layers of trauma and conditioning, fundamental canine instincts remained accessible. That's our baseline, Kate decided, ending the morning session before stress accumulated. Short, positive interactions with clear beginnings and endings. As they returned to the isolation unit, Miles approached with a tablet displaying security footage. You should see this, he said without preamble. Overnight monitoring picked up something interesting. The nighttime infrared footage showed Apex in his isolation unit after Kate had left. For hours, he had maintained the same alert posture, occasionally performing security circuits of the room. But at approximately 3:17 a.m., something changed. The dog had approached the metal dog tag Kate had left in the room, the one from his original military collar. After investigating it for several minutes, he had picked it up carefully in his mouth and carried it to his bed, where he had finally allowed himself to lie down, the tag positioned between his paws. He remembered, Kate said softly. Not just operationally, but emotionally. Or it simply smells like you, Miles suggested pragmatically. No, Dr. Nazari interjected, studying the footage closely. Look at his body language when he approaches the tag. There's recognition there, not just scent investigation. This is significant, Catherine. It suggests his emotional memory remains intact, despite the trauma layering. The revelation provided the first crucial insight into Apex's psychological state. Despite Eastern Shore's assessment of neurological damage causing unpredictable aggression, this behavior demonstrated capacity for attachment, recognition, and emotional response, all elements necessary for successful rehabilitation. Back in the isolation unit, Apex returned to his corner position, the morning's activities having depleted his limited energy reserves. Kate noted how the dog tag was now carefully positioned beside him, suggesting it had become a security object. Rare in military working dogs, but common in those suffering from severe trauma. Rest period now, she explained, maintaining the predictable narration that helped establish security through routine. I'll return at noon for medication and lunch. Throughout that first day, Kate maintained a careful schedule of short, structured interactions, never pushing Apex beyond his capacity, but consistently presenting opportunities for choice and agency. By evening, subtle changes in his behavior had emerged. His hypervigilance, while still present, had begun cycling through periodic decreases that allowed brief moments of genuine rest. He had eaten all offered meals, accepted medication without resistance, and shown increased environmental interaction during each outdoor session. Most significantly, he had begun watching Kate with something beyond tactical assessment, a focused attention that contained the first flickers of what might eventually become trust. Day 2 began earlier than planned when Kate was awakened at 4:30 a.m. by an urgent call from the night supervisor. You need to come to isolation immediately, he reported, tension evident in his voice. Something's happening with Apex. Kate arrived at the facility in record time, half expecting to find Apex in the midst of one of the aggressive episodes described in his Eastern Shore assessment. Instead, she found the night supervisor, Jackson, standing worriedly at the observation window. Started about 20 minutes ago, he explained, first vocalizations since arrival. Through the window, Kate could see Apex pacing rapidly along the perimeter of the room, his posture dramatically different from his previous defensive positioning. Every few seconds he emitted a high-pitched whine, not aggressive, but distinctly distressed. His movements had a frantic quality, almost desperate. Did something trigger this? Kate asked, checking the monitoring logs. Nothing obvious, Jackson replied. He was sleeping, then suddenly became agitated, heart rate elevated to 140 BPM, respiration increased, classic panic response. Kate recognized the behavior immediately, having seen it in both human and canine veterans. Night terror, she diagnosed, not aggression. He's experiencing a trauma flashback. Without hesitation, she entered the security code and accessed the isolation unit, ignoring Jackson's warning about protocol violations. Inside, Apex's distress was even more evident. His eyes had the unfocused quality of an animal caught in a memory rather than present reality. Sweat dampened his coat, and his breathing came in rapid pants. Instead of approaching directly, Kate lowered herself to the floor near the door, creating a non-threatening presence while giving Apex space to process his terror. In a calm, steady voice that contrasted with his panicked state, she began speaking, not attempting to interrupt his experience, but providing an anchor to present reality. "You're at Redemption K9 in Pennsylvania," she said clearly. "Today is your second day here. It's 4:42 in the morning. The temperature is 52 degrees. You're safe, Apex. The deployment is over. For several minutes, her words seemed to have no effect as Apex continued his distressed pacing. Then, gradually, his movements began to slow. His frantic circuits of the room became less regular, his attention occasionally flickering toward Kate's voice before being recaptured by whatever memory held him. Kate continued her steady monologue, providing constant orientation to present reality without demanding response. The floor beneath you is epoxy, not desert sand. The air is clean, no explosives residue. Your left flank was injured but has healed. You're in Pennsylvania, not Afghanistan. Almost imperceptibly, Apex's distress began to recede. His pacing slowed further, then stopped altogether as he stood in the center of the room, head lowered, sides heaving from exertion. For the first time since his arrival, he looked genuinely exhausted rather than vigilant, the difference between a soldier maintaining tactical readiness and one who had finally been overtaken by the trauma he'd been outrunning. "That's it," Kate encouraged softly. "Come back to now. You're safe." What happened next surprised even Kate, who had worked with dozens of combat-traumatized dogs. Apex, still trembling from the after-effects of his night terror, slowly approached her seated position. Unlike his previous calculated movements, this approach had a different quality, not tactical, but seeking. When he reached her, he did something Eastern Shore's assessment had claimed was impossible for this irredeemably aggressive animal. He lowered his head and pressed it against Kate's shoulder. The contact lasted only seconds before he withdrew, to a safer distance, but its significance was profound. In that brief moment of vulnerability, Apex had done more than accept human proximity. He had actively sought comfort from another being. "Breakthrough," Dr. Nazari declared when Kate reported the incident later that morning. "Not just operational response, but emotional connection. This completely contradicts Eastern Shore's neurological damage assessment." "He's not broken," Kate confirmed. "He's buried. Everything he was is still in there, just layered under trauma responses." Over the following days, a pattern emerged in Apex's rehabilitation. Mornings were devoted to physical conditioning, rebuilding atrophied muscles, improving his gait, and addressing the dental issues that had resulted from his attempt to chew through metal restraints at Eastern Shore. Afternoons focused on environmental enrichment, carefully reintroducing him to stimuli that might previously have triggered defensive responses. Most importantly, every interaction was structured to provide choice rather than demand compliance. When Apex showed signs of stress, sessions ended immediately, reinforcing that his signals were being respected. When he chose engagement, positive experiences followed, not as rewards for obedience, but as natural consequences of voluntary interaction. By the end of the first week, measurable improvements had emerged. His weight had increased by 3 pounds as proper nutrition began, rebuilding his depleted body. His hypervigilance, while still present, now cycled through longer periods of relaxation. Most notably, he had begun initiating brief moments of physical contact with Kate, a nose touch to her hand, a momentary lean against her leg during outdoor sessions. "His aggression metrics are already shifting," Dr. Vasquez noted during her preliminary evaluation. "Not enough for general population integration, but trending in the right direction." "What about Chen's team?" Kate asked, referring to the Pentagon representative who had attempted to claim Apex for research. "Are they still pressing for transfer?" "They've requested weekly updates," Hargrove confirmed during the team meeting. "Apparently, they're particularly interested in your methodology. Several of their washout cases have shown similar patterns to Apex." Kate's expression hardened slightly. "They're welcome to observe our general protocols, but I won't have them treating Apex like a research model." "Agreed," Hargrove stated unexpectedly. The board has approved continuing his individualized program through the full 60-day evaluation period, regardless of Pentagon interest. As the second week began, Kate introduced a crucial new element to Apex's rehabilitation: purpose. Military working dogs, like their human counterparts, often struggled most profoundly with the loss of mission that accompanied their removal from service. Without the structured purpose that had defined their existence, many developed destructive behaviors as their highly trained capabilities had nowhere to be directed. Rather than suppressing Apex's military training as Eastern Shore had attempted, Kate designed activities that channeled those skills into new applications. In a secure wood line adjacent to the isolation yard, she created search scenarios that utilized his scent discrimination abilities, not for explosives or enemy combatants, but for specific training aids that represented neither threat nor target. During the first search exercise, the transformation in Apex was remarkable. As he recognized the familiar pattern of a search mission, his entire demeanor shifted. The defensive posture that had dominated his body language gave way to focused determination. His movements became fluid and purposeful, his attention completely absorbed by the task rather than potential threats. "He's operational again, Miles," observed from the monitoring station, professional appreciation evident in his voice. "That's a beautiful search pattern." When Apex successfully located the hidden target, a specific scent pouch containing neither food nor traditional reward, his body language expressed something not documented since before his breakdown: satisfaction. Not joy or excitement, but the centered contentment of a working dog fulfilling his purpose. "That's the spark we needed," Kate told Dr. Nazari as they reviewed the footage. "Not just physical recovery or stress reduction, but reconnection with his core identity as a working dog." The Eastern Shore approach attempted to suppress his working drives, Dr. Nazari noted. They saw his training as the problem rather than the foundation for his recovery. A classic mistake in rehabilitating specialized service dogs, Kate agreed. They're not pets who developed issues. They're working animals who lost their framework for functioning. This fundamental insight drove the next phase of Apex's rehabilitation. Each day now included purpose-driven activities that honored rather than denied his military background. Scent discrimination exercises grew more complex. Tactical movement patterns were redirected toward constructive applications. His intelligence, once channeled toward detecting threats, found new expression in problem-solving challenges. The night terrors continued, though with decreasing frequency. When they occurred, Kate's presence and voice orientation proved consistently effective in helping Apex reorient to present reality. After each episode, his recovery time shortened, and the subsequent contact-seeking behavior became more pronounced. Brief moments where the traumatized military dog permitted himself to accept comfort from a human he was beginning to trust. By day 14, Apex had achieved what Eastern Shore had deemed impossible: voluntary relaxation in human presence. During evening sessions, he would lie on his specialized orthopedic bed while Kate sat nearby, his body language expressing watchfulness rather than hypervigilance, the difference subtle but significant. It was during one such evening session that Kate noticed something extraordinary. As she sat quietly reviewing notes on her tablet, Apex suddenly lifted his head, ears pivoting toward the isolation unit's window. Outside, barely visible in the gathering dusk, a deer had emerged from the tree line, grazing casually at the edge of the facility's grounds. Apex watched the deer with an expression Kate had not yet witnessed: simple, natural canine curiosity. Not predatory assessment, not threat evaluation, but the basic interest any dog might show toward wildlife. For those brief moments, the layers of combat conditioning and trauma response fell away, revealing the fundamental animal beneath. Not a weapon or a monster, but a dog connecting with his environment in the most natural way possible. Kate remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as this momentary window into Apex's true nature revealed itself. When the deer eventually drifted back into the forest, Apex watched it go, then turned to Kate with an expression that contained something new, not just recognition or operational awareness, but a shared moment of experience. In that quiet exchange of glances lay the true beginning of their journey together. Not handler and canine, not therapist and patient, but two beings who had glimpsed something meaningful in the same moment and acknowledged it to each other. The spark had been lit. That night, reviewing footage from the isolation unit's monitoring system, Kate observed another unprecedented behavior. Instead of maintaining his defensive position in the corner, Apex had chosen to sleep on the bed positioned near the window where the deer had appeared. More significantly, for the first time since his arrival, his sleep was deep enough to include the twitching paws and soft vocalizations of natural canine dreaming. His mind finally sufficiently at ease to process experiences through normal sleep cycles rather than remaining locked in hypervigilant semi-consciousness. 2 weeks. Kate murmured to herself as she closed the monitoring feed. 2 weeks, and already proving them wrong. The rehabilitation had barely begun, and the most significant challenges still lay ahead. The night terrors would continue. The trust being established remained fragile. The 60-day evaluation timeline loomed as an almost impossible deadline for a dog with Apex's extensive trauma. But something fundamental had shifted. The dog Eastern Shore had labeled a monster beyond saving, had revealed himself capable of curiosity, connection, and trust. The spark of his true nature, nearly extinguished by combat trauma and institutional mishandling, had reignited, faint but undeniable, ready to be carefully nurtured into something transformative. The journey from spark to flame would require patience. Setbacks would inevitably occur, and skeptics remained unconvinced. But in that moment of shared experience, a human, a dog, and a deer in the Pennsylvania twilight, the first genuine promise of redemption had revealed itself. Apex was finding his way back. The 3rd week of Apex's rehabilitation began with an unexpected complication. As Kate approached the isolation unit for their morning routine, she immediately noticed something wrong. Apex stood rigidly in the center of the room, hackles raised, teeth bared in a silent snarl that transformed his scarred face into the mask of aggression Eastern Shore had documented in their assessments. "Apex," Kate called softly from the observation window, careful not to escalate his already heightened state. The Belgian Malinois gave no indication he recognized her voice. His eyes, previously showing gradual increases in clarity and focus, had taken on a glazed, distant quality that Kate recognized from previous combat cases. He wasn't present in the moment, but caught in some internal battle invisible to outside observers. When Kate attempted to enter the security code, Miles stopped her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "Look at his trigger points," he said quietly, pointing to the surveillance monitor where thermal imaging revealed Apex's physiological state. His body temperature had spiked dramatically, heart rate exceeding 150 beats per minute, despite minimal physical exertion. "Something happened overnight," Kate concluded, quickly reviewing the night logs. Nothing unusual had been recorded. Normal feeding, regular monitoring checks, standard environmental conditions. Yet the dog, who had been making steady progress toward trust and stability, had regressed dramatically to a defensive posture that mirrored his state upon arrival. It could be a delayed trauma response, Dr. Nazari suggested when summoned to assess the situation. The initial adjustment period sometimes creates a false impression of stability before deeper issues surface. Kate studied Apex through the observation window, noting the fine tremors running through his powerful frame despite his rigid posture. This wasn't aggression in its purest form, but fear transformed into defensive display, his only available response to whatever internal trigger had activated during the night. "Check the overnight security footage," Kate instructed Miles. Frame by frame with audio, something triggered this. While Miles reviewed the footage, Kate maintained her position at the observation window, speaking in the same calm, steady voice that had helped Apex through previous episodes. For nearly 30 minutes, he showed no response, locked in his defensive stance with no indication he registered her presence. "Found it," Miles called from the monitoring station. He rewound the security footage to 2:17 a.m., coincidentally almost exactly the time that Apex's night terrors typically occurred. The infrared video showed Apex sleeping when a sound barely audible to human ears registered on the recording. The distant thump of a helicopter passing over the facility. Auditory trigger, Kate realized immediately. The particular rhythm of the helicopter's rotor matched the military transport choppers that would have been integral to Apex's deployment experiences. For a combat-traumatized dog, that sound represented mission commencement, danger zones, the transportation of wounded handlers, a complex web of associations his brain processed even through sleep. His file mentioned helicopter transport during the ambush that killed his second handler, Dr. Nazari noted, reviewing Apex's military history on her tablet. The sound may have triggered that specific trauma memory. Understanding the trigger provided necessary context but didn't immediately resolve the situation. Apex remained locked in his defensive state, the progress of previous weeks seemingly erased in a single night. The setback demonstrated the fragility of trauma recovery, how quickly protective barriers could reconstruct themselves when survival mechanisms were activated. "We need to reset his system," Kate decided after consulting with the medical team. "Not sedation. That would only suppress the response temporarily. We need to create enough physical fatigue to override the neurological stress loop." The approach was counterintuitive by conventional standards. Rather than isolating Apex further until his aggressive display subsided, Kate prepared for a controlled physical intervention that would redirect his energy while respecting the legitimacy of his trauma response, Dr. Vasquez observed with professional skepticism. Physical engagement during an active aggression display contradicts standard protocol. "Standard protocol assumes standard cases," Kate replied, changing into specialized protective gear that would allow controlled interaction while minimizing injury risk. Apex isn't displaying predatory or dominance aggression. He's exhibiting combat-specific defensive aggression triggered by an environmental stimulus associated with operational trauma. The distinction was crucial. Unlike generalized aggression, Apex's response had a specific trigger, context, and purpose rooted in his military conditioning. Addressing it required acknowledging the validity of his experience rather than simply suppressing the resulting behavior. With the medical team monitoring remotely and Miles positioned with a specialized tranquilizer as backup, Kate entered the isolation unit using a protocol specifically designed for combat-triggered episodes. Rather than approaching directly or attempting to establish dominance, she moved to the wall farthest from Apex and began performing the methodical motions of equipment inspection, a familiar military routine that provided structured, non-threatening activity within his field of vision. Apex's initial response was increased tension, his body coiling in preparation for potential attack. Kate continued her deliberate movements, her voice maintaining a steady cadence as she narrated each action, not speaking to Apex directly, but creating an ambient vocal presence that provided orientation without demanding response. "Standard field gear inspection," she explained to the invisible audience of medical monitors, checking straps for wear, confirming buckle integrity, assessing weight distribution. For 15 minutes this pattern continued, Kate performing structured, familiar activities while Apex maintained his defensive posture, neither escalating nor relaxing. The stalemate represented the first major challenge to the rehabilitation approach. If Apex remained locked in his trauma response, unable to reconnect with present reality, the setback could derail weeks of progress. The breakthrough came not through direct intervention, but through environmental adaptation. Kate gradually incorporated movement patterns that mirrored standard military canine training exercises, not ordering Apex to participate, but creating a familiar operational structure that his combat-conditioned mind recognized as secure. Almost imperceptibly, Apex's rigid posture began to soften. The raised hackles along his spine gradually lowered. His breathing, initially shallow and rapid, deepened into a more natural rhythm. He remained vigilant, but shifted from imminent attack, readiness to operational assessment, a subtle but critical distinction. "He's coming back," Dr. Nazari observed through the communication system. Heart rate decreasing, body temperature normalizing. Rather than immediately attempting contact, Kate continued her methodical activity pattern, allowing Apex to reorient at his own pace. When he finally took a step toward her, not in aggression, but in cautious recognition, she acknowledged him with a calm nod, but didn't reach for him or issue commands. "Welcome back, soldier," she said quietly. "Rough night, wasn't it?" The episode lasted nearly 3 hours from onset to resolution. By its conclusion, Apex had returned to a state resembling his baseline from the previous week, not fully relaxed, but present in reality rather than trapped in trauma memory. The incident revealed both the fragility of his recovery and the effectiveness of the specialized approach tailored to his military background. "This will happen again," Kate warned the team during their afternoon briefing. "Different triggers, similar responses. We need to identify as many potential environmental stimuli as possible and develop specific protocols for each." The setback prompted a comprehensive review of Apex's military records, searching for additional sensory experiences that might trigger similar episodes. Helicopter sounds were now obvious, but other potential triggers emerged from his combat history. Certain explosive odors, specific radio communication tones, even particular light patterns that might mimic combat conditions. "We can't eliminate all potential triggers," Dr. Vasquez pointed out. "The real world contains unavoidable stimuli." "We're not trying to create a trigger-free environment," Kate clarified. "We're building his capacity to process triggers without defaulting to combat response. The goal isn't avoidance. It's integration." The helicopter incident marked a turning point in Apex's rehabilitation. While progress had appeared relatively smooth during the first 2 weeks, this setback revealed the complex layers of trauma that would need to be addressed. Each seemingly successful day didn't necessarily represent permanent progress, but rather one point in a non-linear recovery journey. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, Miles observed after reviewing Apex's adjusted progress metrics. "Sometimes 3 steps back," Kate amended realistically, "but still moving in the right direction overall." The following days brought additional challenges as Apex's trauma responses fluctuated more visibly than before. The helicopter trigger had seemingly opened a neural pathway to other combat memories, resulting in more frequent night terrors and occasional daytime hypervigilance episodes. Yet between these difficult periods emerged moments of genuine connection that would have seemed impossible during his time at Eastern Shore. During an afternoon training session in the isolation yard, Kate introduced a new element to Apex's rehabilitation, a specialized scent work course designed to engage his extraordinary olfactory capabilities while redirecting combat-trained detection skills toward peaceful applications. The course contained hidden scent markers requiring systematic search patterns identical to those used in military operations, but without the associated threat context. Apex approached the exercise with initial caution, his recent setback still evident in his slightly hesitant movements. As he began working the first section, however, a remarkable transformation occurred. The physical act of purposeful scent detection activated neural pathways associated with successful missions rather than traumatic ones, effectively creating a bridge between his military training and his new civilian context. His body language shifted dramatically, head high, tail carried at operational height, movements fluid and confident as he worked methodically through the course. When he successfully identified the first target scent, he performed a precise, passive alert, sitting perfectly still while maintaining focus on the source location, exactly as he had been trained to do with explosive materials during deployment. "Look at that," Dr. Vasquez murmured, observing from outside the perimeter. "Perfect operational behavior without a single command." "Because we're working with his training, not against it," Kate explained. "Eastern Shore tried to suppress his military behaviors. We're redirecting them toward constructive applications." The success of the scent work session provided crucial insight into Apex's rehabilitation pathway. Despite his trauma, his operational capabilities remained intact, not degraded by his experiences, but buried beneath protective layers of defensive response. When provided appropriate contexts for these capabilities, he could access his training without activating associated trauma. This realization shaped the adjusted rehabilitation plan. Rather than attempting to convert Apex into a conventional companion animal, a goal Eastern Shore had unsuccessfully pursued, Kate's approach now focused on developing a modified working role that honored his military background while creating civilian purpose. "He'll never be a pet in the traditional sense," Kate acknowledged during the team's strategy session. "His combat experiences and specialized training have created neural pathways too deeply embedded to completely reprogram. But he can become something equally valuable, a working partner whose capabilities serve constructive rather than destructive purposes." The revised approach faced immediate skepticism from Director Hargrove, who arrived for an unscheduled evaluation at the end of week 3. After observing Apex's performance in several modified training scenarios, she expressed concern about the direction of his rehabilitation. "You're reinforcing his military conditioning," she noted critically. The board approved a rehabilitation plan aimed at transitioning him to civilian placement, not maintaining operational behaviors. "With respect, Director, we're not maintaining combat behaviors," Kate countered. "We're redirecting operational capabilities toward civilian applications. There's a crucial difference. A difference the Pentagon representatives may not appreciate." Hargrove warned, "They already view Apex as potential research material for improving military K-9 programs. If they see you essentially preserving his military functionality, they'll see success where Eastern Shore created failure." Kate interrupted firmly. "They'll see a combat-traumatized dog regaining purpose and stability rather than deteriorating in isolation or being euthanized as unmanageable." The philosophical tension highlighted a fundamental question in working dog rehabilitation: whether success meant erasing an animal's specialized training to create a conventional pet, or whether it meant honoring that training while redirecting it toward new applications. For Apex, whose entire development from puppyhood had centered on operational excellence, the former approach had proven disastrous at Eastern Shore. "I understand your concerns," Kate conceded to Hargrove. "But forcing Apex to suppress his fundamental identity caused the breakdown that landed him on death row. We need to work with who he is, not who we might wish him to be." After reviewing the data from the first 3 weeks, including both the promising progress and the helicopter-triggered setback, Hargrove reluctantly authorized continuation of the modified approach through the 30-day evaluation milestone. Her parting comment, however, made her reservations clear. The Pentagon representatives visit in 10 days. They'll expect measurable progress toward civilian integration, not a more functional military asset. The pressure of the pending evaluation added complexity to an already challenging rehabilitation. Beyond addressing Apex's trauma responses and physical rehabilitation, Kate now needed to demonstrate progress that would satisfy multiple stakeholders with divergent definitions of success. The fourth week brought new struggles in the form of physical complications. During a standard medical assessment, Dr. Nazari discovered inflammation around the shrapnel scars on Apex's left flank, evidence that foreign material remained embedded in the tissue, creating recurring infection risk. He needs surgical intervention, she concluded after comprehensive imaging revealed multiple metal fragments. The Eastern Shore medical records indicate they identified the shrapnel but deemed surgery non-essential given his behavioral issues and scheduled euthanasia. The surgical requirement created both a setback and an opportunity. While it would temporarily interrupt Apex's physical rehabilitation, it also provided a controlled context to evaluate his response to veterinary handling, a critical benchmark in assessing his progress towards safe management. The surgery also gives us legitimate grounds to postpone the Pentagon evaluation, Kate noted strategically. Medical necessity takes precedence over administrative scheduling. The preparation for surgery became an unexpected opportunity to gauge Apex's trust development. Unlike his arrival examination, which had required careful management to prevent defensive responses, he now permitted Dr. Nazari's pre-surgical assessment with remarkable tolerance. Though still vigilant, he accepted her gentle manipulation of the tender area, maintaining eye contact with Kate throughout the procedure, rather than focusing on the potential threat of the veterinarian's movements. Extraordinary progress in handler bonding, Dr. Nazari observed as she completed the assessment. He's using you as his security reference point rather than independently assessing threat. That's a fundamental shift in his threat response framework. The surgery itself presented a difficult decision regarding anesthesia protocol. Apex's military history included traumatic experiences while emerging from sedation, a common issue in combat dogs who associated the vulnerable state with injury and danger. Standard procedure would be pre-medication with anti-anxiety drugs, Dr. Nazari explained. But given his adverse reactions to chemical restraint at Eastern Shore, I'm reluctant to introduce additional medications. Could I be present when he wakes? Kate asked. Not during surgery, obviously, but in recovery. The request violated conventional veterinary protocols, but acknowledged the unique circumstances of Apex's case. After consultation with the surgical team, a compromise was reached. Kate would be permitted in the recovery area, wearing protective equipment once Apex began emerging from anesthesia, providing a familiar presence during his vulnerable transition to consciousness. The day of surgery arrived at the beginning of week 4. Despite the careful preparation, Kate felt uncharacteristic anxiety as Apex was led to the veterinary facility. His physical progress remained fragile, and any medical complication could derail not just his recovery, but potentially his chances of survival if the Pentagon representatives deemed him too resource-intensive. More concerning was the psychological impact of separation and medical intervention on their carefully constructed trust foundation. Many traumatized working dogs experienced significant regression following medical procedures, their progress erased by associations between current vulnerability and past trauma. "We'll take excellent care of him," Dr. Nazari assured Kate as the surgical team prepared Apex for anesthesia. The procedure itself is straightforward. Removal of shrapnel fragments, thorough cleaning of the affected tissue, prophylactic antibiotics to prevent further infection. Kate nodded, maintaining calm body language despite her concern. Apex watched her from the examination table, his golden eyes remaining fixed on her face even as the initial sedative took effect. His last conscious action before succumbing to the medication was to shift his gaze briefly to the metal dog tag Kate had placed beside him, the tangible connection to his identity that had provided security during previous stress. The surgery proceeded without complications, the surgical team successfully removing 7 metal fragments ranging from microscopic particles to a piece nearly 2 centimeters long, evidence of the proximity of the explosive device that had caused the original injury. Tissue samples confirmed chronic inflammation had been impacting Apex's overall health, likely contributing to his pain responses and heightened stress reactivity. As scheduled, Kate was permitted into the recovery area as Apex began showing signs of emerging consciousness. Dressed in protective gear but without restrictive equipment that might register as threatening, she positioned herself where he would see her immediately upon waking, her voice providing the same steady orientation she used during night terrors. "Surgery completed successfully," she narrated calmly as his breathing pattern changed, indicating returning awareness. 7 fragments removed from your left flank. Recovery room temperature 70 degrees. Time is 2:17 p.m. You're at Redemption K9 in Pennsylvania. Apex's transition to consciousness began with the expected physical responses. Muscle twitches, increased respiratory rate, rapid eye movement beneath closed lids. The critical moment arrived when his eyes finally opened, unfocused and vulnerable, in a way Kate had never witnessed in this intensely vigilant animal. For several tense seconds, confusion dominated his expression as consciousness returned before recognition mechanisms engaged. His gaze darted around the unfamiliar recovery room, body tensing despite the lingering effects of anesthesia, the precursors to panic response beginning to manifest. Then his eyes found Kate, and something remarkable occurred. Instead of escalating into the defensive aggression Eastern Shore had documented during medical interventions, Apex's body language shifted toward orientation rather than defense. His eyes locked onto Kate's face, using her presence as an anchor point while his neurological systems re-established normal functioning. "There you are," Kate encouraged softly, maintaining her position without approaching. "Take your time. Everything went well." The recovery process continued without the anticipated complications. Though clearly uncomfortable and disoriented, Apex did not display the extreme defensive behaviors documented in his previous medical history. He permitted the recovery team's necessary monitoring, his attention remaining primarily fixed on Kate rather than perceiving the veterinary staff as threats. By evening, he had been transferred back to his isolation unit, modified with additional padding to protect his surgical site and monitoring equipment to track his vital signs remotely. Kate remained with him through the night, sleeping on a cot positioned where he could maintain visual contact, a presence that visibly reduced his stress indicators despite his physical discomfort. The surgical intervention and recovery process provided unexpected validation of the rehabilitation approach. Despite the physical setback, Apex had demonstrated crucial progress in his psychological resilience and trust development. Where Eastern Shore had recorded violent defensive responses to medical handling, he had now navigated a major surgical procedure with remarkable composure. His capacity for adaptation exceeds anything suggested in the Eastern Shore assessment. Dr. Nazari reported during the post-surgical briefing. They documented a dog incapable of trusting human handling during medical interventions. we experienced a patient who, while still vigilant, demonstrated sufficient trust to overcome significant trauma triggers. This successful navigation of a potential crisis point strengthened Kate's position heading into the 30-day evaluation. Though Apex's physical rehabilitation would temporarily slow while his surgical site healed, the medical necessity had revealed psychological progress that might otherwise have remained untested. As week 4 concluded, Apex's recovery continued with measured progress. The surgical intervention had addressed a significant source of physical discomfort, potentially removing an ongoing trigger for stress responses. His trust in Kate had visibly deepened through the shared experience of vulnerability and recovery. Yet significant challenges remained. The night terrors continued, though with decreasing intensity. Certain environmental triggers still prompted hypervigilance episodes requiring careful management. Most concerningly, his progress remained heavily handler-dependent, his trust extending primarily to Kate, with limited tolerance for other team members. The 30-day evaluation loomed with its complex requirements, demonstrating sufficient progress to justify continued rehabilitation while navigating the competing expectations of the project board, the Pentagon representatives, and the medical team. Apex's journey had reached a critical juncture where measurable outcomes would determine not just his rehabilitation path, but potentially his survival. As Kate reviewed his case file on the eve of the evaluation, adding comprehensive notes on both progress and setbacks, she found herself reflecting on the fundamental question that had driven her to rescue him from Eastern Shore in the first place. Not whether this damaged warrior could become a conventional pet, but whether his extraordinary capabilities could find new expression beyond the battlefield that had broken him. The early struggles had revealed both the depth of his trauma and the resilience of his spirit. The coming evaluation would determine whether that resilience would have the opportunity to fully manifest in a new purpose worthy of his remarkable capacity for recovery against overwhelming odds. The morning of Apex's 30-day evaluation dawned with the quiet intensity that preceded significant transitions. Kate arrived at the isolation unit well before the scheduled assessment, allowing time for their established routine to ground both handler and dog before the scrutiny that would determine his future. Apex greeted her with subtle but meaningful acknowledgement, a slight shift in ear position, a momentary softening around his eyes. 10 days post-surgery, his physical recovery progressed steadily, the incision healing cleanly under Dr. Nazari's careful management. The removal of embedded shrapnel had already produced noticeable improvements in his mobility and comfort, particularly in the previously guarded left hind leg. "Big day today," Kate told him conversationally as she settled cross-legged on the floor for their morning check-in. Lots of people, some evaluations, probably some tests designed to provoke responses. She maintained the transparent communication that had become central to their relationship, never shielding him from upcoming challenges, but framing them within the context of their shared journey. "We just show them who you are now, not who they expect you to be." The evaluation team assembled in the observation room at precisely 9 a.m. Director Hargrove representing administration, Dr. Vasquez leading behavioral assessment, Dr. Nazari providing medical context, and Miles monitoring security protocols. 2 unexpected additions had joined them. Lawrence Chen from the Pentagon's Military Working Dog Program, who had arrived a day earlier than scheduled, and a civilian specialist Kate didn't recognize. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, Hargrove introduced, the newcomer, consultant with the National Tactical Officers Association, specializing in canine rehabilitation for law enforcement. Kate nodded professionally while internally recalibrating her approach. An additional evaluation expert, particularly one connected to law enforcement agencies that might eventually provide placement opportunities, complicated the already delicate assessment process. "Colonel Winters," Chen greeted her with practiced cordiality. "I've been reviewing your daily reports. Your approach with specimen 3369 is unconventional." "Apex," Kate corrected automatically. "His name is Apex." Chen acknowledged the correction with a diplomatic nod. "Of course. The Pentagon is particularly interested in your rehabilitation methodology. Several aspects contradict standard protocols for combat traumatized canines." "Standard protocols failed him at Eastern Shore," Kate pointed out. "His case required specialized adaptation." "That's precisely what interests us," Chen replied. "Your background in both combat deployment and canine training has produced intervention strategies we hadn't previously considered. Successful outcomes could have significant implications for our program." The conversation confirmed Kate's suspicion that the Pentagon's interest extended beyond Apex himself to the rehabilitation approach she had developed, potentially valuable intellectual property for improving military working dog programs. Rather than merely research fodder from a failed asset, Dr. Montgomery stepped forward, her clinical demeanor softened by genuine interest. "I'd like to observe without preconceptions, Colonel. Eastern Shore's assessment presents one narrative, your report's another. I'm interested in seeing the dog's current behavioral baseline for myself." The evaluation began with observation of Apex in his isolation environment, followed by assessment of his response to routine care procedures, and culminated in a series of structured interactions designed to evaluate his progress toward civilian integration. Throughout the process, Kate maintained her established patterns, transparent communication, consistent cues, respect for his boundaries, while the evaluation team documented every response. Apex's performance revealed both the remarkable progress of the past 30 days and the significant challenges that remained. In controlled environments with Kate present, he demonstrated appropriate responses to routine handling, basic commands, and environmental changes. His physical condition showed measurable improvement, his weight increasing by 7 pounds since arrival, muscle tone redeveloping, and coat regaining proper condition. The most striking change appeared in his interactions with Kate herself, where Eastern Shore had documented a dog incapable of sustained human contact without defensive response. Apex now showed clear attachment behaviors, maintaining proximity, responding to subtle cues, and even demonstrating occasional solicitation of interaction. "The handler bond is evident," Dr. Vasquez acknowledged during the mid-assessment conference. "His orientation toward Colonel Winters shows genuine attachment rather than simply operational conditioning. But his tolerance for other handlers remains minimal," Hargrove pointed out, noting how Apex's stress indicators increased significantly when team members other than Kate attempted similar interactions. "Realistically, he's bonded to one specific person, not generalizing trust to humans broadly." The most challenging component of the evaluation came when Dr. Montgomery requested assessment of Apex's response to simulated trigger conditions, controlled exposure to stimuli associated with his documented trauma responses. The request aligned with standard protocol but contradicted Kate's graduated approach to desensitization. "We need to evaluate his resilience under stress," Dr. Montgomery explained. "His response to controlled triggers provides essential data regarding his rehabilitation progress. Though reluctant to potentially trigger defensive behaviors that might negatively impact the evaluation outcome, Kate recognized the validity of the request. With careful preparation and safety measures in place, a modified assessment scenario was developed a recorded helicopter sound at low volume, introduced gradually while monitoring Apex's physiological responses. The test revealed both vulnerability and progress. As the helicopter sound became audible, Apex's body language immediately shifted toward alert vigilance, his muscle tension increasing as trauma-associated neural pathways activated. Unlike his previous full defensive response, however, he demonstrated crucial new capacity for self-regulation, looking to Kate for orientation rather than defaulting to combat-ready positioning. He's referencing his handler rather than independently assessing threat, Dr. Montgomery noted with professional interest. That's significant progress for a dog with his history. As the sound intensity increased incrementally, Apex's stress responses became more pronounced. His breathing shortened, hackles partially raised, body preparing for potential defensive action. Yet even at moderate volume levels that would previously have triggered full aggression displays, he maintained positional control, his gaze repeatedly, returning to Kate for security reference rather than locking onto perceived threats. "Remarkable," Dr. Nazari observed. "His sympathetic nervous system is clearly activated, but he's demonstrating cortical override of automatic defensive responses. That capacity was entirely absent in the Eastern Shore assessment." The evaluation continued with assessment of Apex's progress in redirected working behaviors, the specialized training activities Kate had developed to channel his military capabilities toward constructive civilian applications. In the secure training yard, he demonstrated his extraordinary scent discrimination abilities, now directed toward finding specific, non-threatening targets rather than explosives or enemy combatants. Chen observed this portion with particular interest, making extensive notes as Apex methodically cleared search quadrants with precision that reflected his elite military training. "His operational capabilities remain intact despite the trauma," he remarked. "Most washout cases show significant degradation in working behaviors because we've maintained the integrity of his training while redirecting its application," Kate explained. Eastern Shore tried to suppress his working drives entirely, creating internal conflict between his conditioning and their expectations. The final component of the evaluation assessed Apex's capacity for environmental adaptation, his ability to function in settings outside his established isolation routines. This represented both the greatest risk and the most significant opportunity to demonstrate meaningful progress toward eventual civilian placement. With comprehensive safety measures in place, Apex was guided to an unfamiliar section of the facility, a simulated home environment used for transitioning rehabilitation cases toward domestic settings. Unlike the sterile institutional spaces of both Eastern Shore and the isolation unit, this environment contained furniture, household objects, and the complex sensory input of a typical living space. As Apex entered this novel environment, his initial response demonstrated the hypervigilance that remained a core feature of his trauma profile. His body tensed, senses heightened as he performed a thorough tactical assessment of the unfamiliar space. Yet unlike previous exposures to new environments, he didn't default to defensive positioning or show aggression indicators. Instead, he conducted a methodical security sweep, behavior reflecting his military training, but without the combat-ready tension that had characterized earlier assessments. "He's utilizing operational protocols constructively," Dr. Montgomery observed, performing security assessment without threat assumption. Once his environmental assessment was complete, Apex exhibited an unprecedented behavior. Rather than maintaining vigilant positioning near exits or defensible corners, as documented in previous evaluations, he voluntarily approached a floor cushion near where Kate had positioned herself, investigating it thoroughly before settling into a sphinx position, not fully relaxed, but demonstrating capacity to establish baseline comfort in a novel environment. That's the first non-tactical settling behavior documented in his case history, Dr. Vasquez noted with careful optimism. Previous assessments showed him incapable of voluntary relaxation in unfamiliar settings. The comprehensive evaluation continued for nearly 6 hours, documenting every aspect of Apex's current functioning against the Eastern Shore baseline and the rehabilitation goals established for the 60-day program. By late afternoon, the evaluation team withdrew to compile their findings while Kate returned Apex to his isolation unit, both handler and dog exhausted from the extended assessment process. "You did everything asked of you today," Kate told him as she settled him back in his familiar space with fresh water and a special meal Dr. Nazari had prepared with additional protein and nutrients to replenish his energy after the demanding evaluation. "Now, we wait for their decision." The evaluation conference convened in the main building's meeting room, the atmosphere charged with the gravity of decisions that would determine not just Apex's future, but potentially impact military canine rehabilitation protocols more broadly. Kate sat somewhat apart from the others, her professional demeanor masking the personal investment she had developed in Apex's outcome. Dr. Vasquez presented the behavioral assessment first, her clinical precision establishing the factual foundation for subsequent discussion. "Subject demonstrates measurable improvement across multiple domains of functioning," she began, displaying comparative metrics on the room's main screen. "Baseline aggression indicators have decreased by approximately 42% since arrival. Stress reactivity shows similar reduction patterns, with recovery time following trigger exposure decreasing from an average of 73 minutes to 31 minutes. The statistical evidence painted a compelling picture of progress, but Dr. Vasquez balanced optimism with clinical reality. However, significant concerns remain regarding generalization of trust behaviors beyond the primary handler. Subject shows minimal tolerance for handling by secondary team members and continues to display hypervigilance in novel environments despite improved adaptation capacity. Dr. Nazari followed with the medical assessment, highlighting Apex's physical recovery while acknowledging ongoing concerns. Surgical intervention successfully removed embedded shrapnel and associated inflammatory tissue. Weight has increased from 68 pounds at intake to 75 pounds currently, with improved muscle tone and coat condition. Dental issues have been partially addressed, with additional treatment scheduled for the coming weeks. The most significant testimony came from Dr. Montgomery, whose status as an independent evaluator carried particular weight with both Director Hargrove and the Pentagon representative. Her assessment would heavily influence not just the continuation of Apex's rehabilitation, but the potential development of modified protocols for similar cases. Based on comprehensive observation and comparative analysis of documented behaviors, she began with measured precision. "It is my professional assessment that the subject demonstrates rehabilitation potential exceeding anything suggested by the Eastern Shore evaluation." The statement created a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a collective recognition that expert opinion had aligned with Kate's controversial assessment rather than the terminal prognosis that had nearly ended Apex's life. The specialized methodology employed by Colonel Winters has produced measurable progress in behavioral regulation, environmental adaptation, and handler bonding that contradicts previous assessments of irreversible aggression, Dr. Montgomery continued. "While significant challenges remain, particularly regarding generalization of trust behaviors and management of trauma triggers, the 30-day outcomes suggest continued rehabilitation is both viable and warranted." Director Hargrove leaned forward, cutting to the practical implications. Your professional recommendation regarding continuation of the program. I recommend continuation through the full 60-day evaluation period with specific protocol modifications, Dr. Montgomery replied without hesitation. The subject demonstrates sufficient progress to justify extended rehabilitation with qualified optimism regarding potential civilian placement in a specialized environment. The recommendation represented a crucial endorsement, particularly coming from an independent evaluator with law enforcement connections. Kate maintained her professional composure despite the internal relief this assessment provided. Chen's perspective, however, introduced complex considerations beyond Apex's individual rehabilitation. The Pentagon recognizes the significance of the progress demonstrated, he acknowledged. However, our interest extends beyond this specific case to the methodology itself. He turned to Kate directly. Colonel Winters, your approach contradicts several established protocols for military working dog rehabilitation, yet the outcomes after 30 days exceed anything documented in similar cases at Eastern Shore or other transition facilities. The department is interested in developing a formal research partnership to study and potentially implement your methodology more broadly. The proposal carried both opportunity and risk. A formal Pentagon partnership would provide resources and protection for Apex's continued rehabilitation, potentially extending far beyond the 60-day evaluation period. However, it would also place both Apex and the rehabilitation approach under government oversight, with implications for autonomy and ultimate placement decisions. What specifically would this partnership entail? Kate asked carefully. Full documentation of your methodology, periodic assessment by military working dog program specialists, and development of standardized protocols that could be implemented for similar cases, Chen explained. In exchange, the department would provide extended funding for this case specifically and potentially for a broader program focused on combat traumatized canines. Director Hargrove recognized the strategic value of such a partnership for the project's sustainability. This could create a specialized program track within Redemption Canine, she noted. Dedicated resources for military working dogs transitioning from combat roles. And Apex's ultimate placement, Kate pressed, focusing on the individual dog rather than the broader programmatic implications, would depend on his continued progress. Chen replied diplomatically. Our interest is primarily in the rehabilitation process rather than reclaiming him for service. If civilian placement proves viable, the department would support that outcome. The carefully worded response didn't fully address Kate's concerns about Chen's original interest in transferring Apex to research facilities. However, the documented progress and independent expert endorsement had clearly shifted the Pentagon's approach from viewing him as a research subject to recognizing his value as a rehabilitation model. After extensive discussion of both Apex's individual progress and the potential partnership framework, the evaluation team reached consensus on next steps. The rehabilitation program would continue through the full 60-day evaluation period with the specific protocol modifications recommended by Dr. Montgomery. Discussions regarding the Pentagon partnership would proceed on a parallel track, with decisions regarding implementation to follow the final evaluation. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Montgomery approached Kate privately. "You've accomplished something remarkable in 30 days, she said with professional respect. Most handlers wouldn't have seen past the aggressive displays to recognize the training conflict underneath. He was never the monster they labeled a him, Kate replied simply. Just a soldier stuck in combat mode with no mission parameters to guide him. That insight is exactly why your approach succeeded where Eastern Shore failed, Dr. Montgomery observed. You understood the fundamental nature of his condition, not generalized aggression, but specialized training without appropriate application. She hesitated briefly before continuing. I have connections with several specialized placement programs for rehabilitated working dogs, particularly those with military or law enforcement backgrounds. If his progress continues along the current trajectory, I'd be interested in discussing potential opportunities beyond the 60-day evaluation. The conversation provided Kate with cautious optimism as she returned to the isolation facility that evening. Though significant challenges remained in Apex's rehabilitation journey, the evaluation had formally recognized what she had intuited from their first interaction. Beneath the defensive behaviors that had earned him the monster, lay extraordinary capacity for recovery and adaptation. Back in the isolation unit, Apex greeted Kate with subtle but unmistakable recognition, his body language conveying both fatigue from the demanding evaluation day and relief at her return. For the first time since his arrival, he approached her, directly upon entry, rather than waiting for her to establish position, a small but significant shift in their interaction pattern that reflected growing trust. "Good news," she told him as she settled onto the floor beside his bed. "You passed your 30-day evaluation. We have another 30 days officially approved, and potentially more depending on how things progress." As had become their evening routine, Kate began reviewing the day's activities in the conversational tone that helped Apex process experiences while strengthening their communication bond. The pattern provided predictability and helped him transition from the heightened alertness of active periods to the relaxation necessary for proper rest. "The evaluation team saw past the labels today," she continued. "They saw you, not the file, not the assessment, but who you actually are and who you're becoming." Apex listened with the focused attention that characterized their interactions, his golden eyes tracking her expressions, ears shifting to catch nuances in her voice. Though he couldn't understand the specific implications of the evaluation, he clearly registered the positive shift in her emotional state. As the evening progressed and the facility quieted for the night, something unprecedented occurred. During their standard relaxation protocol, Apex made a decision that represented perhaps the most significant breakthrough of his rehabilitation journey. Without prompting or positioning, he voluntarily moved from his separate bed to settle directly beside Kate, his body making contact with her leg. The first time he had initiated sustained physical connection without stress triggers or security seeking. The behavior represented far more than simple companionship. For a combat-traumatized dog whose survival had depended on maintaining tactical distance and defensive readiness, voluntary close contact demonstrated extraordinary neurological override of ingrained survival patterns. The choice to place himself in sustained physical proximity without tactical purpose reflected emerging trust that transcended operational conditioning. "There you are," Kate whispered, carefully maintaining position to avoid disrupting this momentous choice. "I knew you were in there all along." The breakthrough continued as Apex gradually relaxed into the contact, his breathing deepening, muscle tension releasing incrementally until his head finally lowered to rest partly against Kate's leg, not the vigilant Sphinx position that allowed for immediate response, but genuine rest that required trust in his environment and handler. Dr. Nazari, arriving for evening medical checks, observed this tableau through the observation window with professional amazement. "Don't move," she instructed Kate quietly through the communication system. "I need to document this. It contradicts everything in his previous assessment regarding contact tolerance." Through the specialized monitoring system, the medical team captured the physiological evidence of this breakthrough. Apex's heart rate decreasing to normal resting levels, his respiratory pattern shifting to indicate genuine relaxation rather than the alert rest he typically maintained. Most significantly, his brain activity registered changes consistent with secure attachment rather than operational positioning. This is the neurological shift we've been working toward, Dr. Nazari explained later when reviewing the data. His brain is finally processing your presence as security rather than tactical advantage. It's the foundation of trust-based relationship rather than simply handler-asset positioning. For Kate, the moment transcended its clinical significance. After 30 days of measured progress, setbacks, and careful rebuilding, Apex had made a choice that Eastern Shore's assessment had deemed impossible: voluntary vulnerability with a human handler. Not because of exhaustion, medication, or containment, but through emerging trust that contradicted everything in his documented history. As facility operations shifted to night protocols and monitoring transferred to the overnight team, Kate remained in the isolation unit, unwilling to disrupt this crucial developmental moment by leaving. Apex maintained his position of contact throughout the evening, occasionally shifting position, but always re-establishing connection, his body gradually relaxing into sleep patterns that had previously been possible only in brief intervals. For the first time since his arrival, Apex slept through the night without evidence of night terrors or hyper-vigilant waking. The monitoring system recorded normal sleep cycles, including the REM phases often disrupted in traumatized canines. By morning, he had achieved more consolidated rest than at any point documented in his rehabilitation history. The physiological repercussions of this breakthrough became evident immediately. Apex awoke with visibly different energy, his movements more fluid, his alertness characterized by healthy awareness rather than defensive vigilance. Most notably, his eyes showed clarity that had previously been visible only in brief glimpses between hypervigilant episodes. Sleep healing, Dr. Nazari commented when reviewing the overnight data. His brain finally achieved the restoration cycles necessary for trauma processing. One night won't resolve his issues, but it demonstrates his neurological system can still access normal functioning. The timing of this breakthrough, immediately following the 30-day evaluation, seemed almost deliberately choreographed, as though Apex had waited for official validation before permitting himself this crucial step toward recovery. Coincidence wasn't lost on Kate, who recognized the intelligence behind his seemingly calculated timing. "You were waiting to see if we had a future together, weren't you?" she asked him during their morning routine, receiving an intent gaze in response, making sure commitment went both ways before taking the risk. The breakthrough created ripple effects through every aspect of Apex's rehabilitation program. With improved sleep came better physical recovery, enhanced cognitive function, and increased capacity for adaptive responses to environmental challenges. The neurological benefits of consolidated rest accelerated progress across multiple domains, creating a positive feedback loop that reinforced each incremental improvement. Most significantly, the breakthrough in trust development opened pathways for expanded rehabilitation activities previously deemed too challenging for Apex's trauma profile. With the foundation of secure attachment established, the team could begin implementing more advanced protocols for environmental exposure, controlled socialization, and specialized training for potential civilian applications. The Pentagon Partnership. Discussions continued in parallel, with Chen returning to Washington to present the 30-day findings to his department. The impressive outcomes had shifted the conversation from research interest in a failed asset to genuine engagement with innovative rehabilitation methodology, a transformation that mirrored Apex's own journey from discarded monster to rehabilitation. Success story. As the rehabilitation program entered its second 30-day phase, the initial breakthrough expanded into consistent patterns of progress. Apex's trust behaviors generalized gradually to include limited tolerance for secondary handlers, particularly Dr. Nazari, whose gentle medical care had demonstrated consistent respect for his boundaries. His environmental adaptation improved steadily, allowing carefully structured excursions beyond the isolation facility to build his capacity for functioning in varied settings. The dog labeled irredeemable at Eastern Shore was systematically dismantling that assessment through daily choices and responses that contradicted everything in his documented history. The breakthrough hadn't erased his trauma or eliminated his challenges, but it had created the essential foundation for genuine rehabilitation. Trust that transcended conditioning and connected with the core identity beneath the layers of combat experience and institutional damage. As Kate documented this turning point in Apex's official record, she found herself reflecting on the universal truth his journey illustrated, that beneath the labels applied by those who saw only broken parts lay the possibility of wholeness, waiting for recognition, patience, and the opportunity to emerge through relationship rather than isolation. The first breakthrough had arrived, not as an endpoint, but as the true beginning of Apex's journey from discarded weapon to valued partner with purpose beyond the battlefield that had nearly destroyed him. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.